Hello, welcome to the second ever episode of the Your Sports Discussion podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed the interview with Dom in the last feature. Today we have another special guest coming on. We have Will from Scouching. Will Scouch, he's a great guy. And we talked about the NHL draft. Today we're also going to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers alongside some other NFL topics. And the last thing we're going to talk about is the Premier League and just the really random, in a way, random start to their season that they've had. Alright, so the first thing I wanted to talk about was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because I find them very interesting as a team, especially with Tom Brady. There's a lot of narratives there. They got Antonio Brown. I know they technically haven't played this Sunday. They haven't played yet. They're not on the Sunday football schedule for this week. But they'll probably beat the New York Giants, so I don't think there's going to be much to add there. But I want to talk about Brady and how much of a positive impact he's had, like ignoring just the stats and ignoring also, I'm not going to talk about the leadership either, but what I wanted to talk about specifically was his impact on the system that was in Tampa Bay, because that Tampa Bay system last season was never going to win a Super Bowl. Jameis Winston, he was like the worst possible case when with those 30 interceptions, but the risk it for the biscuit approach, like all the shots downfield, that whole entire thing with that Bruce Arians had going where it's constant like up tempo, the ball's getting thrown downfield a lot. It was high risk passes a lot. There was bound to be interceptions. Like Winston was like he wasn't accurate. Like I'm not gonna defend Winston for those 30 interceptions. But Brady did what had to be done for that system. That system needed to be calmed down. It needed to be cooled down. As talented as the wide receivers are in Tampa Bay with Godwin and Evans, so that's what it was last year. And now they have Evans, Godwin, and Antonio Brown, which is just crazy to think about. As talented as they were, that system wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to win a championship. But that's Brady calmed that down. He like slowed down the system. He knows when to slow down. He knows when to take a shot down the field, and he knows when to slow down the system for everyone, because you can't always be playing that high velocity, high up tempo system. It doesn't always work. So Brady calmed that down with throw it down to the tight end, dipping down to like made a system that is, I'm not gonna say easier to play since it's not easier to play, but sometimes safer to play in order to retain the ball, keep the ball for longer, not throw those interceptions. And yeah, and there were learning curves. That's like Tom Brady was throwing interceptions at the start of the season, and there were learning curves. But now I think the Buccaneers, they're the real deal. Antonio Brown, if Antonio Brown does not screw up, if he stays on the right path, he doesn't do anything stupid, just until the Super Bowl, until the playoffs happen, the playoffs finish, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the favorites to come out of the NFC, because they're the one team in the NFC, in my opinion, right now, where you can point to them and say, you know what, you don't have a weakness out of the contenders. You can look at, what's it called? You can look at the Seahawks and you can say, look, your defense is in shambles. It's a terrible defense. It's probably the worst in the league besides the Cowboys. And then I'm just gonna pull up some stats here for the defense. But the Seahawks defense is terrible, while the Tampa Bay Buccaneers arguably have the best defense in the NFL. The Rodgers seems in Green Bay, they seem to have a lack of weapons. They seem to have a lack of weapons here. So if I look here per Football Outsiders, yeah, the Buccaneers have the best defense in the NFL, while the Seahawks are, yeah, they're at the bottom. The Seahawks are like my other pick. If I had to pick someone out of the NFC, it would be the Seahawks, and they're amongst the bottom for defense in the NFL per Football Outsiders. And then you think about what else is there? Like I said, the Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers, they don't have enough weapons. It's just not it. But the Buccaneers, they have the best defense in the NFL, arguably at least top 3 minimum. They have a great attack. It's only got better and will only get better the more the Brady, Godwin, Evans, Gronkowski, as they get used to this new system, they get used to each other. So yeah, I don't think there's any reason not to view the Buccaneers as favorites out of the NFC. And then for the AFC, I wanted to talk about the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers and their Sunday night football game. Not night football, but their Sunday football game. The Ravens in the first half and the Titans in the second half, in my opinion, really exposed the Steelers. In terms of the Steelers blew a lead against the Titans, and then the first half of the Pittsburgh Steelers-Ravens game on Sunday football, the Ravens looked like they were going to destroy the Steelers. And in the run game, they were pounding them, and they did finish the game pounding them. Dobbins had 113 yards for 17.5 yards per carry alone. And then Edwards had 87 yards with 5.4 yards per carry and a touchdown. And then Lamar Jackson himself got another 65 yards from the backfield. But then, so that was like, the Steelers looked exposed. Their defense looked exposed. So one of the teams who were supposed to, like, they're still undefeated, but they've looked exposed. And then for the Ravens, it was the same problems. Lamar Jackson did not even complete 50% of his passes. So that's just not going to cut it for a team that's looking to contend. Your quarterback in the big games has to be able to throw the ball effectively. And I do think Lamar Jackson's throwing ability starts to get underrated sometimes, but you can't defend it either. It's not good right now. It's not the pass offense for the Ravens has not been effective. If you look at, so this is Lamar Jackson's stat line yesterday. It was 13 completions from 28 attempts. So that's sub 50% like I talked about. 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. And then if we talk about the Ravens versus the Chiefs game, which was even worse for Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson didn't even crack 100 yards. He had 97 yards. At least he was able to get 50% completion when he had 15 attempts completed on 28. 15 completions on 28 attempts for 97 yards and a touchdown. But even then, he's against good teams in meaningful games that show whether you're a contender or not. Lamar Jackson has not proven to be an effective passer. And the Ravens' offense has proven not to be effective in the pass game in all situations, all games. But Lamar Jackson, particularly in the big games, has not shown an effective ability to pass the ball. I don't like to focus specifically on like individual moments. That's not like individual games. I don't like to highlight those all the time. I like to look at the bigger picture. But when this is a pattern in Lamar Jackson's career, where in the big games, compared to Patrick Mahomes, compared to the quarterbacks of other contending teams, you just don't trust Lamar Jackson. He cannot throw the football effectively to win the game. If you can at least contain that run-based offense, you've basically won the game. If you force him to throw the ball, you've won the game. If you get into the lead against the Ravens and force them to pass, you've won the game. So, what I'm going with this, with the Steelers being exposed in the second half of the Titans game, and in the Ravens game, their rush defense are exposed. And the Ravens being exposed, multiple times, their pass offense being exposed. That leaves with the question, who's going to actually who's going to compete with the Chiefs in the AFC? I know they were against the Jets yesterday, but they looked unstoppable. They've had hiccups in the season, but who do you trust more in the playoffs? Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, or Patrick Mahomes or Big Ben? Who are you trusting more? Personally, I'm going with Patrick Mahomes, and then also last other team, the Tennessee Titans. They just lost to the Bengals yesterday, and their defense has been bad. To be blunt, the Titans' defense has not been good. And they haven't been able to win a game that's like not close. They've every game has been a comeback on like down to the wire. They haven't shown like contender material. So that's my 2 cents on the situation. The Kansas City Chiefs are, you can almost have them as a lock to be in the Super Bowl if the AFC continues playing like this, because they're the only team in the AFC who I can look at and say you have no weakness. All right. So first of all, I just want to say that I love your work. It's your YouTube videos, the whole 9 yards. It's all really enjoyable.
Thank you.
And then for my listeners, for some of not everyone knows what you do. So do you think you can explain the type of work that you do to everyone else?
Yeah, of course. So what I basically do is just analyze NHL draft prospects, but in a way where I'm manually creating a database of data. So what I'm tracking is events on the ice where the player is involved directly. So what I'm trying to do is isolate exactly what it is on a concrete data-based level, what it is that a player is doing on the ice and how they participate within their unit on the ice. And then, using the video side of it to project how those results are generated and how those results might translate to the next level. So always a work in progress, but mostly it's watching a lot of hockey from all around the world, building a database, and then analyzing the video afterwards.
All right. So I know I like that. I like the data elements. I think in general for teams too that it's hard to watch all the prospects because there's way too many of them. You can't do that. It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily possible. So that's where the data I think it fills in. It can help fill in gaps for a team.
Mm-hmm.
And then about this year's draft. This year's draft was one where I was really interested in due to just how much talent it seemed was in this draft class. And then from your experience, like tracking different drafts over the past couple years, how does this draft class compare to other draft classes?
Well, I this year was the first one where I really sort of made the data tracking element the focal point. So previous years it was I would track data just to make the YouTube videos, but now it's like I'll make the YouTube videos out of guys in the data that stick out. So this year was the first one where I had a really, really sort of solid database. It was about 3 rounds deep of guys where I had felt at least capable of having some kind of input and reporting. Um, and not all of them ended up getting drafted,
Mhm.
funnily enough. But when it comes to previous years, I mean, I didn't have as much data tracked, but it was pretty undeniable to me that this year had a very highly talented top end group, and even the group beyond that was I would say better than average. Um, and I think that this year, coming out of the draft, I think you're going to see a lot of really good players available through multiple rounds that ended up going a little bit later than they should have. Um, and I think the same thing is the opposite. I think there were guys that were drafted pretty high that were, you know, that might not have required that kind of a pick. I think the COVID thing has, had an effect on different teams differently, and I think different things changed in different ways for them. But definitely, I think in terms of quality of talent, 2020 was a really good one. Um, so yeah, I can see that even if I didn't have as much data from prior years that I manually tracked myself.
I thought there were lots of really good prospects in the draft, especially coming from Europe. At least personally, I spent a lot of time looking at those prospects, and they had lots of talent coming from there. But on the note of like the prospects, who were some of your favorite prospects from this year's
Oh
draft?
man, I mean, I really really like. I mean, it's funny. I'm working through editing and uploading my 2020 recap video series on YouTube, and the last team that I edited and uploaded was the Minnesota Wild. I mean, they landed Marco Rossi at 9. I thought that was a great pick of all those picks in the top 10 in terms of the type of player you're getting at that particular slot. I mean, Marco Rossi was a great pick at 9. And I really liked Marat Kuznetsov, who they picked up in the second round. I pushed his name really hard all year. I'm just a big fan of what he could become. Maybe not the
Yeah.
best player now, but that's where the projection comes in. Um, I really like Danny Gushchin. He ended up going later than I thought he would go. I just need to double check where he went in terms of like he went to San Jose. I thought San Jose had a great day as well. Just a bunch of really high skill, potential high end players that you can plug and play in the NHL and have them produce. I think that that's going to be helpful. I mean, I'm a big fan of Jean-Luc Foudy. I'm a believer in him. I know a lot of people weren't because, he does things that are sort of poor tendencies on the ice, but I think you can work on the stuff that he has issues with, especially when you start putting him with some more skilled and speedy line mates, just like he is. Because there were some metrics that I tracked of Foodie that were far and away put him in a quality that is top first round at least. In
Mhm.
terms of moving pucks up the ice, skating speed, agility. A lot of these things are really really high level for him to the point where I didn't see very many players putting up similar numbers. So I'm a believer in that guy. So there's a few. It was certainly a very interesting draft overall, but yeah, the names I mentioned there are probably the ones that I would poke at right away.
And I'm a huge fan of Foodie too. I took a look at his some of his data. I watched some of his film, and I think that stands out like he's a sensational skater. He can do things in transition that I find very impressive. And how
Yeah.
about the opposite though? Who do you view as players who you think were taken too high or
Um, I mean, I know everyone is poking fun at the Columbus Blue Jackets, but I mean, it was a little bit crazy to see them take Igor Chinikov at 21, and I know everyone has a laugh, but I think if the end goal at the 21st overall pick is we just want a guy that we can put in our lineup and have go out and score goals, even if a lot of those goals are on the power play, Chinikov could be that guy. I mean, the thing about Chinikov is that in terms of shooting the puck, he has one of the better quality shots that's out there, and he's scoring in the KHL, and he has some decent tools. I still wouldn't have drafted him at 21, but that's not a guy that I would identify as a guy that was picked a little bit too high. I look at Justin Barron at 25 and say, well, that's the Colorado Avalanche really hoping that he regains form that he had prior to injury. Um, and the games that I tracked of him this year were not great. And I know that I'm not alone in that. I didn't really think Caden Gooley was the guy for 16th overall. I think Montreal has this weird two-headed monster of scouting where they look at skill that's just sort of falling to them, but then at the other side of the coin, they're looking for big physical players that can skate. And when I see Caden Gooley, I see that, I get it, and he is a decent defensive player with a good set of feet under him, especially considering how he plays the game. But there's areas of the game where I think all of that gets nullified, and I think that it's enough of a road ahead to be questioning of if he's ever going to be a real solid two-way impact guy. If he's a defense first guy who can play with a bit of a physical edge, maybe like an Andy Green or a Scott Mayfield or something, then sure, I could maybe see that being valuable, but how valuable? And that's the big question with a player like Caden Gooley. And when you look at the guys that went off the board after him, like Dawson Mercer, Hendrix Lapierre, even Tyson Forster, Jacob Perreault. I mean, I look at those guys and say, well, I see a more clearer trajectory for those guys to be top six offensive pieces one day. Whereas Caden Gooley, I think, has a bit of a ways to go to be more than maybe a number four, penalty killer with okay 5-on-5 play, I guess.
I think I agree with you on that, especially, I'm a smaller guy, so when I see big guys getting I see big guys getting drafted and you see they seem like they're missing something.
Right.
Especially, and then like I think the most a famous one, which that brought up a debated prospect on Instagram. I think you've seen it before. Is Jake Sanderson? He got taken fifth by the Senators. Yeah, I
Sure.
think he was taken too high in my opinion too.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I think if it were me, I wouldn't have done it that way. I think, especially if I'm the Ottawa Senators, I mean, next year, there's a lot of really good defensemen available. And I mean, I'm the more and more I dig into 2021, the more I see about 10 or 11 guys that could go number one. And the more I see if you have a pick in that top 10, you're going to get a player that's going to be pretty interesting. And I think the Ottawa Senators, if they wanted to target a defenseman, would probably want to do it next season. But, Jake Sanderson is not an awful hockey player. It's a tolerable pick for 5. I think he's going to be a nice second pair, two-way guy that can play on the power play, play on the penalty kill. Just a nice Swiss Army knife type of defenseman. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have been my avenue. I think I'm more, in my data, there's a lot of stuff that made Jake Sanderson look better than Jamie Drysdale. I still probably would have leaned Drysdale ahead of Sanderson, but yeah, I mean, I think this whole year as a whole was relatively light for defensemen, and usually when that happens, you can expect teams to sort of stick their neck out a little bit more just to get a defenseman, and I think we saw a little bit of that with the Ottawa Senators and Sanderson.
Yeah, I think my biggest problem with the pick wasn't really like Sanderson himself as much as it was that Drysdale was still on the board. Where if they still wanted a defenseman, I thought you think they'd go down that path. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I could see that. Yeah, I mean I get the logic. I get the logic from their perspective, but yeah, if it and the only thing you can say is if it were me, and if it were me, I probably wouldn't have done it, especially when you look at what might be available in a year. So we'll have to wait and see. I think he's going to be a solid player, but again, like the thing I always ask is, what are you leaving on the board when you get the guy that you want? And I think there was a lot on the board that really could have helped the Ottawa Senators in more of an impactful way. But Jake Sanderson will be, I think, a useful piece for that team for a long time.
I couldn't agree more. Then I think the things that most people care about, they're fans of their teams. Who do you think were the biggest draft winners from this draft, or like teams from the perspective of the teams?
I mean, any team who gets first overall is usually a winner. So the Rangers, I thought, did well, obviously, because they ended up with that pick. Um, I thought the Kings had a really good day. I mean, getting Helga Garance in the second round is a no brainer. I thought the Kings had a good day. I liked Toronto's draft when you consider where their draft slots were, when you consider what they paid to get their first round pick. I liked their draft overall, and thinking relatively to where they were picking in the draft and the slots that they had. I really liked San Jose and Minnesota. They didn't. I mean, Minnesota had a top 10 pick. San Jose actually gave up a top 5 pick, so that's a problem. But I thought that considering San Jose didn't have that, they did really well overall. Detroit made some really really interesting picks. But definitely the ones at the top for me are the Rangers having first overall. I thought the Kings did really well. Toronto, and then yeah, San Jose and Minnesota. Those would be the quick ones for me.
I know personally I had the Leafs as my draft winners. Like I'm not a Leafs fan, but when I saw it was what stood out for me was when they traded down and got Hervonen and
Yeah.
Niemela. That was the move that I think stood out from the draft as like, in my opinion, was like the best overall move in terms of gaining value.
Yeah, I would say that as well. And I think that's a big thing. I mean, it's funny. I just woke up this morning and had a YouTube comment from someone on my Red Wings video saying that, I graded the Maple Leafs higher than Detroit. I mean, I look at when I grade draft classes, I think about relative to what they had in the draft. Like if Toronto had a chance to draft Lucas Raymond and didn't pick him, then I probably wouldn't have rated them as highly. But for Toronto, I mean, Rodion Amirov at 15, I think is a great pickup. I think he's a great fit for a multitude of reasons in Toronto. And then, yeah, like you said, the trade for that pick that became Tyler Clevin, I mean, from what I know, they made that trade because they thought they could get one of those two players at 59. And that's why they made that deal. They wanted one of them and they ended up getting both. So I think that I think we look back at that trade in a couple of years and I think Toronto gets two solid everyday NHL players, and the Ottawa Senators might I would say might have one solid NHL player. So that's something that can reverberate, right? Like Toronto's going to need guys like Amirov, Hervin, and Niemela to be on entry level contracts and producing, and that's going to be what they need to if they want to be contenders for the next 5 years, 10 years. They're going to need guys like this, and then a few years later, you get VT Miettinen coming out of college. So I think they're going to be patient with a lot of these guys because they have to be. But once they're signed and ready to go, it's I think a lot of these picks make a lot of sense for Toronto, and I just really liked every single pick they made. Almost they just kind of swung for the fences in one way or the other, and I think that's what you're supposed to do with the draft.
I agree with you, and I think people tend to view the draft as like it's misconceived in a way that's only used for rebuilding teams, but it serves as much importance for a team that's looking to contend or currently contenders in order, as you said, to fill in the roster with players who are on entry level contracts, like the Leafs want to do with their draft
Mm-hmm.
picks.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. I mean, there was a lot of teams that were contending this year that I thought could have used, just take the skilled offensive player that's just sitting there. And there was a lot of teams that I think were they either had their guy or maybe they got cold feet about drafting first time eligibles and went back to their notes from prior years where they have, more to look back on because I felt like a lot of guys that were second time eligibles or third time eligibles got drafted this year. So I think that if I'm a contending team, the angle has to be maximizing potential value at every pick, and then trying to develop that into pieces that can help your team maintain success. Because I think a lot of teams were picking players that are big and physical, and I think they were sort of hoping that one day they're bottom six players, because if you got a bottom six player in the fifth round, then great. But I don't know. I guess it's two different philosophies, but for a team that really will need help from guys like the guys that Toronto drafted and San Jose drafted, I think those teams did very well considering where they were picking.
Couldn't agree more. Then, of course, the inverse is all, I think, just as important. Who do you think were the biggest draft losers from the 2 days?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I focus on what you're leaving on the board, right? And I look at the Ottawa Senators and just I can't help but think that they kind of um, you know, they they had a ball sitting on a tee and they took a crack at it, and they bunted it for a single. They got on base, but like it's kind of frustrating because they had a lot of chances to land a lot of really good talent, and I didn't see them really swinging that big. And I mean, the guys they drafted later in the draft, I thought there were some really good players that went undrafted, and teams probably could have taken a swing on them. I looked at what Tampa picked up. I mean, if the first guy off the board for you is Jack Finley, I don't really think that your board is going to come away with a tremendous amount of good players. Finley is one of those guys where maybe he's a bottom six guy with some development in his skill. And, like I never liked the pace of his game. He was always more of a defense first guy, and getting the puck to Adam Beckman, who would then just dazzle the world. Um, I look at Boston as well as a team where I just didn't really. Half the guys they drafted I had never heard of, and when I looked at tape after the draft, I didn't really see the appeal. I thought Buffalo did the same thing as Ottawa, where they just didn't really maximize what they were doing. I thought John Jason Paterka was a good pick, but I mean, passing on Marco Rossi to take Jack Quinn, I think there's an argument to be made for that, but I don't think it's a very good one. I think Jack Quinn's a player where a lot of things need to happen that he doesn't do very well in order to put him in a position to do things that he does well. He's an offensive generator, and that's mostly it in terms of what I find projectable. So, if one day he's playing on a line with Jack Eichel, I certainly think he could be a guy that scores a ton of points. I don't see how that wouldn't be an issue, but he's going to be one of these guys who isn't much of a, I don't think he's much of a play driver, but more of an offensive output guy, which is fine. But when you look at who was on the board there with Perfetti and Ray and Rossi, even Lundell, I mean, I think that the Buffalo Sabres maybe took a crack at something that they might not necessarily find as useful. So those are the four big ones. I thought St. Louis did not great, but I'll forgive it considering they've been doing so extremely well recently. I guess Tampa has done the same, but I look at what Ottawa did, and I thought Ottawa could have had an absolutely transformative couple of days for their entire franchise. And I think they erred on the side of bigger, more physical players who are older. A few of their guys are 20, maybe even a bit older now. And they did the same thing last year. Is it going to work out? I guess we'll see. But I always look at that and go, well, there's players who are 2 years younger and who are measurably better. And maybe it's a personality match. Maybe there's a financial side to it. I don't know. But I felt that there was a lot of potential left on the board by teams like Ottawa and even Tampa and Boston, I think, was a very confusing one as well.
I agree with you, and I think, especially about Ottawa, it felt like, I don't know about you, but like as a Canadian, I like seeing Canadian teams do well. But when I see Ottawa, they missed out on a lot of talent in a way. But like the trading down, like that aside, just like in general, like they missed out on a lot. And then that whole entire, it leaves a bad taste when you see a team, which seems like they mucked up in a way.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, yeah, I could see that. I mean, it's you want, like, especially because I'm from Toronto and I grew up with that Leafs Senators rivalry in the 2000s, and like you want that kind of thing, right? Like you want these teams to line up and you want these teams to face off against each other and you want them to hate each other. Like Brady Tkachuk trying to get under the skin of Austin Matthews in a playoff series in 2 years is something that I want to see. So when I look at what the Ottawa Senators came out with, they could have ended up with multiple core pieces and pieces that could be core pieces of your team in a few years that could shoot the lights out. And I felt that a lot of their picks were, lower pace, more physical, sort of hard work guys that earn things, which is fine. But I think there's also a difference between that and guys that actually move the needle at the NHL level. And I think they passed on a lot of that. So it might be something where it extends their rebuild a little bit longer because they can't graduate these guys to the NHL as effectively. But I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I guess that's the sum of that's the story of the draft. At the end of the day, we can project as much as we can, but we do end up having just to wait and see.
Yeah,
For I don't want to take too much of your time, so thank you for coming on to the podcast. For just so you can tell people how can they see some of your content online.
for sure. So you can follow me on Twitter at Scouching, YouTube as well, same Scouching. If you really like what I do, I have a Patreon account where you can support directly financially. There's a bunch of perks and such. You can get access to videos early. I do the recap series every day, but they have access to them as soon as they're uploaded, so they're about a week ahead. There's a Discord server that is quite lively, and plenty of other stuff you can check out. You can also do the same on YouTube if you want to join directly from there with your YouTube account. And beyond that, I've got a Teespring shop called Scouchwear, which you can check out. But yeah, Twitter and YouTube are the main ones, and the rest is up to you.
All right, thank you for coming on, man.
Oh, anytime. Thank you very much.
See you later.
I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Will. He's a great guy, and if you haven't, check out his work at Scouching on Twitter, on YouTube. Subscribe to his Patreon if you can, because there's tons of excellent content, and he made some great content on the draft. I don't think there's anyone better than him for it that's publicly available. But lastly, I want to talk about the Premier League and just how crazy the start to the season has been, because it has been crazy. Yeah, average goals per game, like in total, and you take both teams, has gone up by a whole entire goal. And then just looking at the title race, you can just see how crazy it is. Through 7 games of the season, through 7 weeks, the top four is Liverpool, Tottenham, Everton, and Southampton. And then if you go as far going to the top six, you can include Wolves and Chelsea. Then in seventh place is Aston Villa. That's the top seven. Manchester City are all the way in 10th, of course, but they've only played 6 games, but still they're in 10th. And in 15th, you can find Manchester United. So as you can tell, it has been a crazy race so far. And then if you look at the expected point tables, you can find this on Understat. It's a great website. You should check it out. It's free. You have Liverpool, Tottenham, and Chelsea make the top three. Everton would be in fourth, and then you have Aston Villa in fifth for expected points, and Arsenal in sixth. Manchester United, for expected points, are currently in the relegation zone, so that's a surprise. It's been a shocking start to the season. Manchester City are not even close to the top four per expected points. That could be attributed to the fact that they've only played 6 games. Same for Manchester United. They've also only played 6 games, but it is a telltale sign. At least Manchester City have a positive expected goal difference, so that's a consistent sign that they'll improve. Manchester United, on the other hand, have a negative expected goal difference. They're relying on penalties for expected goals over the past since last season and this season. So while they'll probably climb back up, it'll be, I think, difficult for them to emerge as something like a serious title contender. Man City, I don't have any doubts for them that they'll come back, but it's going to be an interesting title race, which I think will be between Manchester City, Tottenham, and Liverpool. Everton, in my opinion, they could compete. I looked at their expected goals numbers. They do generate chances. That's like they have a good expected goals numbers. Their defense is a bit shaky, but they're not on a great run of form right now. And I can largely like they just lost to Newcastle on the current match day, and they lost to Southampton last week, and they drew to Liverpool in their third. Like that's a good result, but in their last 3 games have been a draw and 2 losses. So that's not exactly a great run of form by any stretch of the imagination. They're dependent on James Rodriguez, and Like they're for sure dependent on James Rodriguez, and I don't think their team is as strong or as creative without him, and he's been out right now. He's out with an injury. Also, whether Dominic Calvert-Lewin, whether his goal scoring rate continues, it'll have to be seen. He currently has 8 goals on 5 expected goals, which is sustainable for like the really. Exceeding their expected goals by that rate is sustainable for the really best of the strikers. Whether he is one of the world's best finishers or not, that'll be proven over the course of this season if he continues with this. I think he can possibly, if he continues getting into good situations where he can score, that's been the main reason for his sensational run of form. It has been getting into good situations where he can finish. It's not just a bunch of luck. Last season he was underperforming his expected goals. This season he's overperforming it, but not by a margin which is unsustainable. I do think he can do it. Whether he does will be seen, but I do think he can maintain it. Whether he's at over a goal per 90 minutes, we'll have to see. I don't think he'll maintain, but I do think he can continue scoring at this excellent rate and be that striker that Everton need to potentially push them into Champions League contention under Carlo Ancelotti, which is not of the realm of possibility with the team they're building. There's rumors, of course they're just rumors, that Isco is interested in joining James and Ancelotti, former Madrid guys, in Everton. And that'll be a great add for them in terms of having another creative force alongside James to make their team even stronger. So there's lots of potential there in Everton. I like what they're doing. And there's a bright future there under Carlo Ancelotti. For Liverpool, on the other hand, it will be an interesting season for them with Virgil van Dijk injured. They haven't been the best team defensively that's their expected goals against let me look here, is the 5th worst in the league with 9.9 expected goals against through 7 games. And with Alisson injured, he's coming back soon, but with Adrian in goal, they had some of the worst goaltending in the league, the worst goalkeeping in the league, and they have 15 goals against, which is leading in the Prem. Of course, they're sensational offensively. They're matching their expected goals. They have 17 goals for with and expected goals of 17.2. And I've got no doubt in my mind Klopp will get them back on the right track, per se, in terms of being more solid defensively. I think it's important to realize that in Liverpool's situation, a lot of their expected goals against came in a very shocking result in that 7-2 to Aston Villa. In that game they allowed like a lot of XG, like let's say a significant portion of their XG, their expected goals against, came against Aston Villa in that game. Here, if I look here, they had 3.9 of their XG came against their expected goals against. My bad, XGA came against Aston Villa, and 7 of the goals they allowed were also against Aston Villa. Their defense has not been great. I think they've only kept 1 clean sheet so far in the season. Yeah, that clean in the Premier League against Chelsea, which is impressive, but still. So they have something to be worried about for sure. They have something to be worried about for sure in terms of replacing Van Dijk and being defensively solid. How Klopp goes about that, I'm not sure, but that's something they're going to have to do. It looks like they're getting back into good form. They're on a small winning streak right now. Whether they can keep up this good form without Van Dijk and continuing, plugging and playing different players into the defense, you'll have to see. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. The last thing I'm going to talk about is Tottenham. Tottenham, in my opinion, they're the dark horses to win the Premier League under Jose Mourinho, because in a season which has been very, very random, per se, like it's been defined by attacking output, lots of chances, scrappy defending that hasn't been that effective. Tottenham have been able to be solid defensively, and Jose Mourinho will always lead a strong defensive unit. That's That's something that's always going to happen. They're coming off a 2-1 win right now. They have some of the best. They're amongst the best in expected goals against for this season. And while as a team they are exceeding their expected goals by a lot, especially Son, Heung-min Son, he has been exceeding his expected goals a lot. He has a 2.9 expected goals for this season, while he's scored 8. Whether he maintains that, he probably won't. He's exceeded his expected goals a lot throughout his career, but not at this rate. He probably won't. But Harry Kane, he's one of the best strikers in the world. He's one of the best finishers in the world. He'll have no problems exceeding his expected goals. He has 4 expected goals on the season. With it's not fully updated yet. This is the last game has been updated, but he has 4 expected goals, and he scored 6, and that's sustainable for one of the best strikers in the world. He's routinely exceeded his expected goals, and he will generate a lot of expected goals too. So I have no problems for Harry Kane. He'll be fine. Tottenham will be fine as long as Harry Kane and Heung-min Son stay healthy. They can link up in attack and make it all the way maybe to the top of the Premier League with the defensive solidity of Jose Mourinho and their system, their mid-block system, which has lots of potential. So yeah, thank you for listening to this episode of the Your Sports Discussion podcast. If there's any guests you guys would like to have on, just let me know. You guys can DM me on Your Sports Discussion on Instagram. Make sure to check me out there. If any of you guys are interested in coming to chat, also message me on Your Sports Discussion. I'd love to have some of you guys on to talk. And thank you for listening. If you guys can share the podcast with one of your friends, that would also mean a lot to me. And yeah, thank you very much.